Hello, 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 hello.
Yoga सार हे नार वार देह पादे अनुरा निर्भय गाथ संशय दृढ निश्चय मान सवा निष्कारण भगत शरण निष्कारण भगत शरण त्याजे जाते कुल संपद तव श्रीपाद भव पुष्पद वारिज प्रेमार पान समुदार शान प्रेमार पान समुदार शान जागो जानो दुख যায় সম্পদ তব শ্রীপাদ ভব পুষ্পদ বারি যথায় প্রেমার পান সমুদার শান প্রেমার পান সমুদার শান জাগো জানো দুঃখ যায় নমো নমো প্রভু পাপ মনাতীত নমো मन वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरजतेय जल रीति कंदर ज्योतिरजतेय जल रीति कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्मनातीत नमो नमो प्रभु वाक्मनातीत मन वचन एकाधार प्रभु मन वचन एकाधार ज्योतिरजतेय जल रीति कंदर ज्योतिरजतेय जल रीति कंदर तुमी तम भंजनहार प्रभु तुमी तम भंजनहार लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंगुटंग मृदंग दे लंग रंग भंग बाजे अंगुटंग मृदंग गाइছে ছন্দ কত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার গাইছে ছন্দ কত বৃন্দ আরতি তোমার জয় জয় আরতি তোমার হর হর আরতি তোমার শিব শিব আরতি তোমার খণ্ডান ভাব ॐ ह्रीं ऋतं तमोचलो गुणजेत गुणेभ्यः नाक्तं तेवं सकरुणं तव पादपद्मं मोहं कषं बहुकृतं न भजे जतोऽहं तस्मात् तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो भक्तिर्भगश्च भजनं भवभेदकारि गच्छन्तलं सुविपुलं गमनाय तत्त्वं वक्त्रधृतोऽपि हृदये न मे भाति किञ्चित् तस्मात् तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो तेजस्तरन्ते तरसा त्वयि तृप्तो तृष्णा अगे कृते ऋतपथे त्वयि रामकृष्णे मार्तामृतं तव पदं मरणोर्विनाशं तस्मात् तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो कृत्यं करोति कलुषं कुहकान्तकारे स्नान्तं शिवं सुविमलं तव नामो नाथ यस्मादहं त्वस्मरणो जगदेकगम्य तस्मात् तमेव शरणं मम दीनबन्धो ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः ॐ नमो श्री भगवते रामकृष्णाय नमो नमः। ॐ सर्वमङ्गल मङ्गले शिवे सर्वार्थसाधिके शरणे त्र्यम्बके गौरी नारायणी नमोस्तुते सृष्टि स्थिति विनाशानां शक्तिभूते सनातनी Jayonarayani Namostute Jayonarayani Namostute Jayonarayani Namostute Jayonarayani Namostute. Jai Mahamai ki Jai, Jai Bhagawan Sri Ramakrishna Dev ki Jai, Jai Swami Ji Maharaj Ji ki Jai.
नमः श्री अतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरे सच्चित् सुख स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. So we were towards the end of the last lecture, we were discussing this point that Vivekananda has raised between the contrasts that exist between the Oriental society, specifically the Indian society, and the Occidental society, specifically the then society obtaining in England and the US. And there are two features, positive and negative, that he brought forth. And we'll start with there and then get on. In India, we have to take off the shackles from society. In Europe, the chains must be taken from the feet of spiritual progress. Then will come a wonderful growth and development of man. If we discover that there is one unity running through all these developments, spiritual, moral, and social, we shall find that religion, in the fullest sense of the word, must come into society and into our everyday life. You will understand that all sciences are but manifestations of religion, and so is everything that exists in this world. This is where we had come to last time, and there is a fair bit here, so it bears repetition. One particular thing is that, and he has amplified this before, that Buddhists who are agnostics by nature and Charvakas who are materialists by nature were allowed the full freedom to express their views in India of yore. In other words, if people are free to express what they feel deeply as regards the nature of reality, these bigger questions, that is what is being called spiritual freedom. On the other hand, social norms regarding what kind of behavior is acceptable in society or not, the less the restrictions, the more the freedom in a society. These were the 2 points that he compared and contrasted. And he came to the conclusion that this freedom to express deeper convictions, so-called spiritual freedom, is greater in the Oriental society, particularly the Indian society, but the social freedoms obtaining in the country are less. The society is rule-bound. There are societal injunctions against people behaving in a particular way. And what then is the solution? You take these 2 elements, these conditions of freedom from the 2 societies, Oriental and Occidental, combine them together so that people have freedom both in terms of their spiritual convictions and in terms of societal norms. A person eats something or dresses a particular way and society comes down upon him or her, that is not indicative of a mature society. A person's personal behavior, so long as it does not impinge in another person's personal freedoms to a reasonable extent, should be allowed. That's what freedom in society means. At the same time, if one expresses one's sincere and deep convictions, and one is open to debating these convictions and putting them forward, however they might contradict our belief systems, allowing this kind of a clear, open discourse is what is meant by spiritual freedom. And it is the combination of these 2 kinds of freedom that is being envisaged by Vivekananda here. In particular, he talks about science, which means a method of acquiring knowledge, as part and parcel of this spiritual progress. Why? Typically, the connotations, the thoughts, the ideas that come to our mind when we think of science is that it is materialism. But isn't that a prejudice? In another place, in Is Vedanta the Future Religion, in that particular lecture, Vivekananda talks about this idea that it's only in these so-called sacred books that spiritual life is contained and so-called secular knowledge is something lesser, is born out of superstition and not being able to appreciate precisely the depth and glory of human knowledge. So, whenever we are seeking knowledge that is universal, and certainly scientific knowledge is of that kind, what we are doing is we are approaching the spirit of human beings, the essential defining feature of human beings. It is precisely that aspect which outlasts the individual, which outlasts the individual's body, which outlasts the individual's mind, but that knowledge carries on in and through the species. This is the value of knowledge per se, and this division into something being sacred and something being secular is not indicative of maturity or understanding of the human spirit in any essential or deep sense. It arises out of a very superficial understanding of the spiritual urge, basically restricted to some external coarse rituals. And there it ends. And therefore the form becomes more important than the content. So and so a particular utensil has to be washed 10 times, not 9 times, not 11 times. And if it is done 9 times, all hell breaks loose. This is just silliness. In a different place, Vivekananda calls this imbecility, stupidity. Where the essence, the spirit of the activity is forgotten and the outer covering alone is maintained. I think I've narrated this story a couple of times here, but it's a story I'm rather fond of. In some point of time, there's a sort of slightly apocryphal story about how before a particular yagna was to be conducted, a cat had to be caught and a string had to be tied around its neck, and the other end of the string had to be tied around a doorknob. And some skeptic, after years and years of watching this ritual, could not find much meaning behind it, and then finally started tracing the origins of this ritual back. And it turned out many years back, several decades back perhaps, when this particular yagna was conducted, a cat was coming and disturbing the yagna. So it was caught, and in order that it does not disturb the yagna anymore, a rope was tied around its neck, and the other end of the rope was tied around a doorknob so that it could not run away and create a nuisance. And then subsequently, the year after that, then he said, oh yeah, last year there was this cat, and that cat was caught, and this rope was tied around its neck, and it was tied to a door. So, people without questioning, without asking, what's the point of this? Just went around mindlessly doing the same thing year after year. And you do some mindless stuff year after year, what happens? It becomes a ritual and becomes sanctified by so-called tradition. Very often when we don't have a reason for an action, when we aren't particularly secure about our convictions, we say, oh, this is the tradition. And if we say it with a solemn enough air, with a lot of heaviness in our voice, people are supposed to be intimidated by that. This is pure silliness. This is what takes away the real essence of the spiritual quest and allows it to devolve into some mindless traditions and rituals to be followed, where the core of it, the essence of it, is forgotten and the form alone is maintained. It is in the light of this kind of understanding that we look at the statement of Vivekananda again, that you understand that all sciences are but manifestations of religion, and so is everything that exists in this world. He first says sciences. Where then in the sciences are we to seek this spirit, this core spirit of religion? We'll have to go back to the core of these pursuits, both these pursuits, the religious pursuit as an individual endeavor, not as a social organized setup, not as an organization which basically tells you the do's and don'ts and does not tell you the why. Similarly, the science as a pursuit, it is to be done in such and such a way, following such and such norms. That is not what is being referred to here. What makes the human being seek scientific knowledge? What is it in us that makes us seek scientific knowledge? What is part of the constitution of human beings that make them seek religion? It is these fundamental questions that need to be asked and addressed. And then we find that at the bottom of it, there's a common motivation. What is that? We look out in the world and we are faced with something that we do not comprehend, namely this so-called, this reality that we call external, one, ourselves, another, and third, the relationship between the subject, which is mysterious, and this object, which is just as mysterious. And it's in order to address these mysteries and remove the exclamation marks there that we want to come to a clarity of understanding. Because it's only then that life becomes bearable. This meaninglessness or mystery, I mean, if mystery evokes in us a sense of wonder, that is a positive emotion. But if it basically tells us that, look, all this is meaningless, or I'll never be able to find meaning to this, then it becomes something depressing. What's the difference between these two emotions of futility and meaninglessness on the one hand and wonder on the other? Wonder actually drives us forward to unravel mysteries, to make them into convert this wonder, this mystery, backed by a desire to know what it hides. And once we know it, the wonder has served its purpose. The other, in terms of activity, in terms of practical significance, it just makes us recoil and become dull. One evokes intense mental activity to unravel the mystery. The other basically says that, oh, I am stumped by this mystery, I do nothing about it. One evokes the highest faculties of the mind, the other the lowest. So, it's in terms of this response from us that we should understand that both the core individual religious urge and the core scientific urge are brought on by something that is essential, something that is common to the human constitution as a whole. It's basically the desire to understand what lies behind this multifarious, this variety that impinges on our senses on a day-to-day basis. How do we unify all this information? How do we convert this information into knowledge? How, based on that knowledge, do we act and convert that knowledge to wisdom? It is this positive track which is common to both the religious urge fundamentally and the scientific urge fundamentally. It's basically trying to understand these three eternally mysterious objects, namely ourselves, next the world, and third the relationship between these. It is this triad of mysteries that any of these things is trying to solve. But then there is a chance that all of it runs dry. Yeah? There's a poem which I'm pretty sure many of you have heard by Tagore. I'll say the Bengali and then I'll translate it in English. Jetha tuchho acharer morubalu rashi bicharer srotopot phelenai grashi pourushere koreni shotodha. Where the mindless following of where the clear stream of reason has not lost its way amongst the dreary desert sands of dead habit. This is Tagore's own translation of this poem in Bengali. See, essentially, what is that? It's a prayer. Yeah, it's a prayer. Into that heaven of freedom, let my country awake. That's how the poem ends. Yeah. It's basically expressing this glorious vision of Vivekananda in very beautiful poetic terms, where this urge for knowledge drives us and makes us stretch out our arms by striving forth for greater knowledge and greater wisdom, and not just for ourselves, but for society at large. What are the principles? And if you look at this subjective human motivation, he is expressing it in terms of poetry. It's some kind of a devotional prayer in some sense. But now you look at it from a purely analytical point of view, from the point of view of a scientist. What's the purpose of science? The purpose of science is to acquire knowledge behind natural phenomena. And here, nature does not just mean things that lie outside this bag coated by a skin which we call eye. Nature includes how our physiology functions, how our blood, how our heart, how various tissues function. That's what's called medical science. How our mind functions, called psychology. These are all aspects of the scientific quest. Output, knowledge, awareness of how these things function. Why? Because it's that knowledge which has been captured in a particular generation that can be passed on subsequently. It's this that defines a certain uniqueness of our species. It is this that allows us this tremendous capacity called speech. There's a particular area in the human brain called the Broca's region, which is responsible for speech. It's highly underdeveloped in other species. It is this speech that allows us to convert our thoughts into symbols, sound symbols, which we call speech. And then when it's converted into a visual symbol, that's called writing. And so literature that was written thousands of years back or was passed on by oral tradition thousands of years back can be read by us today. Can the same thing, is it so easy for animals to do this? No, they cannot record their thoughts in a way that will survive the death of the individual member of the species. Which is why we are outside the zoo and the other animals are kept inside the zoo and we go and watch them. These are aspects of human intelligence. It's basically, there is nothing religious about any of this. It's something that defines a commonality between two different members of the same species. The individual member may die, but knowledge acquired in a generation is passed on to the next. Yeah? And what is the cause behind it? What is it that has led us there? It's precisely this unrestrained inquiry. Inquiry guided by the desire to know the truth at all costs. The highest value that science stands for are two. One, that truth is worth knowing above everything else. Two, that truth is not the monopoly, not the personal possession of some select few, but the benefits of that enquiry need to be made available to all, at least in principle, and in course of time in practice too. These are the hallmarks of freedom. Freedom to enquire, one. Freedom to make that knowledge, fruit of the enquiry, available to others. This brings us to the next sentence in this particular lecture of Vivekananda. We see then that through freedom the sciences were built. And in them, so through freedom the sciences were built. This point needs to be understood fairly carefully. Think back to a society where the religious urge, concretized in terms of a number of beliefs, refuses others the permission, the freedom to enquire into the truths underlying such beliefs, and persecutes those who dare enquire into the foundations of these beliefs. That society is basically indicative of lack of freedom, absence of freedom. On the other hand, that which allows this enquiry, and if it forces certain closely held beliefs to be overthrown, so be it. It is this freedom that has allowed the sciences to grow. The age of enlightenment that we refer to in Europe basically talks of a period where human beings as a society in the West moved from its belief in the church or in religious dogma towards a more rational society where scientific benefits were given greater credibility and greater importance over and above religious rituals. And it is this pursuit of knowledge which today translates to most material well-being in society. Right now, I have a laptop open in front of me, I'm speaking in a mic, there are these lights on, there is a camera on in front of me. What are these? Would any of this have been possible without the evolution of the scientific pursuit? No, clearly not. Which means that the benefits of this inquiry, the benefits of scientific inquiry is now translated into something which is tangibly practical. Let me take up the example of a computer. This is a laptop. Hardly anybody can do without it today. Any corporate, any organization, any academia, any people in academia, nobody can do without it. When did this come up? The theory of this is not very old, 1940s and 50s. Alan Turing, people might have heard of him. The person who founded the theory of computers, a mathematician. And it is this that led to an implementation in terms of engineering where all information is coded in terms of zeros and ones. Accelerate that some few decades and you have this fine laptop open in front of me. Piece of technology born out of this innate human urge to pursue knowledge and truth above everything else. And this then is the spirit of human being in its deepest and most all-encompassing sense. For people who do not have that range, who would like to fragment reality into belonging to X organized religion versus Y organized religion, and then there are these scientists who are all atheists. It is this silly fragmentation of humanity into artificially created components that these lines speak against. So let's return to it. This is a critique of organized religions. Now he's going to come to a critique of exactly the opposite standpoint, which is organized atheism, which is just as bad. Just as organized religion imposes restrictions on human beings and their freedom to inquire, organized atheism does the same thing. It merely scoffs without actually investigating what there is which is true. Throwing out the baby with the bathwater. We see then that through freedom the sciences were built, and now he's going to differentiate. And in them we have two sets of opinions. The one, the materialistic and denouncing, and the other, the positive and constructive. It is a most curious fact that in every society you find them. Supposing there is an evil in society, you will immediately find that one group rises up and denounces it in vindictive fashion, which sometimes degenerates into fanaticism. There are fanatics in every society. Every fanatic who gets up and denounces something can secure a following. It is very easy to break down. A maniac can break anything he likes, but it would be hard for him to build up anything. These fanatics may do some good according to their light, but much more harm. Because social institutions are not made in a day, and to change them means removing the cause. Suppose there is an evil. Denouncing it will not remove it. But you must go back to work at the root. First find out the cause, then remove it. And the effect will be removed also. Mere outcry does not produce any effect unless indeed it produces misfortune. This is particularly significant today. Why? Because it's very easy indeed, to rabble-rouse, to raise in people their innate qualities which are negative. So basically not innate positive aspects, but things which are aspects of us as a species, products of evolution. For example, anger, hatred, fear. What does one need to do? All that one needs to do somehow is say that, look, all these frustrations and angers that you feel, there is this group of people or there is this individual who is responsible for them. And if that lie is said sufficiently many times, if that propaganda is spread enough, what happens? You start believing in it. And the mind becomes conditioned to accept that I am not responsible for my misfortunes, so and so out there is. It's basically, again, our human frailty, that we do not acknowledge our own faults. Instead, it's much easier and much more comfortable to feel and believe that my misfortunes today are due to so and so in history who created some nuisance in some 1 decade, 1 century, 1 millennium back. It's basically blaming somebody else for my misfortune and therefore feeling more comfortable about myself. And to this particular blame game is played in the name of organized religions very often, which is why organized religions come to loggerheads with each other. They keep fighting each other. But you'd ask them how to distinguish between the two, hardly any difference. People have the same genetic makeup, but then there is some hatred that has come up. Why? Because somehow or the other I start believing this is basically a certain leftover of our animal evolution. I believe that I belong to tribe 1, which subscribes to religion 1. There's another person who belongs to tribe 2 and subscribes to religion 2. And the tribe 1 cannot tolerate the tribe 2. Why? Because we will quote this great word without knowing what it means. Tribes 1 and 2 have been in constant conflict with each other, and that is the tradition. In other words, we use meaningless words to justify our negative emotions. We give post facto and false justifications for our negative emotions instead of taking responsibility for them ourselves. This is why he says, mere outcry does not produce any effect unless indeed it produces misfortune. This kind of emotional angst, without backing it up by principled action, can only lead to misfortune, both of ourselves and of society as a whole. It can lead to polarizations. It cannot unify. For example, right now there are huge problems facing all of humanity. We are still in the midst of a pandemic wave which has affected human beings across the board, regardless of society we belong to, regardless of our religious beliefs, regardless of our nationality. This is a real problem that faces all of us as a species. 1. 2. There's a global climate change. Global warming is a fact today. It's something that faces all of us, all human beings as a species. But instead of addressing these problems that face us as a whole, we start going back into imaginary stories of hurt and pain which are dead and gone, at least 100 years old or maybe 50 years old, and then start picking at our scabs and basically eliciting in our own hearts these feelings of anger, hatred and fear, making each one of us a smaller person. Instead of unifying human beings, it divides, it polarizes. It is this that is being spoken against here, and he ends therefore with the statement, mere outcry, mere emotional diarrhea is not going to produce any tangible effect. All it can do is it can create misfortune and suffering both for oneself and for others. We'll start from here next time. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.